Imagine for a second that you're standing in a small, dark room in England. It's almost midnight, June 1944. Outside, the world is about to change forever. But inside this room, it's just one man and a radio. His hands are shaking, his heart is thumping against his ribs, and he's typing out a message that will either save thousands of lives or send them all to their graves. He's not a soldier. He's never fired a gun in a war. He's a guy who used to farm chickens in Spain. But right now, he is the most important person on the planet. He's about to tell the biggest lie in history, and if the Nazis believe him, the world is saved. If they don't, everything is over. This isn't a movie plot. This actually happened. The man's name was Juan Pujol García, but the Germans knew him as Agent Garbo. They thought he was their best spy in Britain. They trusted him with everything. What they didn't know was that Juan was actually working for the British, and every single word he sent was a trap. This is the story of how one man with a massive imagination and no training at all managed to trick the most dangerous people on Earth. To understand how he did it, we have to go way back, long before the radios and the secret codes. We have to go back to Barcelona in 1919. Juan was just a 7-year-old kid then, and even as a child, he was stuck between two totally different worlds. His dad was a pretty relaxed guy who owned a factory. He believed in freedom, talking things out, and treating workers well. His mom, on the other hand, was very strict and very religious. At the dinner table, it was like a constant tug of war. His dad would talk about progress and new ideas, while his mom would talk about tradition and following the rules. Juan sat right in the middle. He didn't pick a side. Instead, he learned how to navigate both. He learned how to tell his mom what she wanted to hear, and then turn around and talk to his dad in a way that made sense to him. This was the birth of his greatest skill, reading people. He didn't care about the rules or the politics. He cared about the person standing in front of him. He learned that if you understand what someone wants to believe, you can make them believe anything. When he was 7, they sent him to a boarding school run by monks. It was a nightmare for him. It was all about discipline and punishment. One day, a teacher humiliated him in front of everyone, and Juan just had enough. He walked out and never went back. He didn't have a high school diploma. He didn't have any fancy degrees. By the time he was 13, he was just a kid working in a hardware store. But while other kids were studying math or history, Juan was studying people. He picked up languages like they were nothing: Spanish, Catalan, French. He wasn't just learning words, though. He was learning how people thought. Then the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936, and this is where Juan's life really started to get messy. Spain was ripping itself apart. On one side, you had the Republicans, and on the other, you had the fascists under General Franco. Juan got drafted by the Republicans, but because his family had a factory, they didn't trust him. They threw him in prison just for being middle class. Later, he managed to get out and ended up in the fascist army, but they didn't like him either. They beat him because they thought he liked the Republicans too much. He was caught in the middle of a war where both sides hated him, and both sides were trying to kill him. It was a miserable time. He saw people dying for ideas that didn't even make sense to him. By the time the war ended in 1939, Juan reached a very important conclusion: ideology kills people. He realized that when people get obsessed with isms and politics, they stop being human. He decided he didn't want anything to do with it. But then World War II started, and he saw what the Nazis were doing. He realized he couldn't just sit back and watch. He had to do something. In 1941, he walked into the British Embassy in Lisbon. He told them, "Look, I want to be a spy for you. I hate the Nazis and I want to help." The British official looked at him, saw a guy with no training, no military background, and no connections in Germany, and basically laughed him out of the room. He tried 3 more times, and every single time they told him no. They thought he was a joke. But Juan didn't give up. If the British wouldn't take him, he'd make them take him. He went to the German embassy instead. He told the Nazis he was a huge fan of their movement, and he traveled to England all the time for business. He told them he could set up a spy ring in London. The Germans were a bit suspicious, but they were also desperate for information. They gave him a basic spy kit, invisible ink, some codes, and a little bit of money, and told him to go to England and start reporting. Here's the crazy part. Juan never went to England. He went back to Lisbon, Portugal. He sat in a library with a map of England, a bunch of old newspapers, and a travel guide for tourists. He decided he was going to fake the whole thing. He started writing reports to the Germans, pretending he was in London. He'd look at the weather reports in the paper and write, "It's a very rainy day here in London." He'd look at train schedules and write about troop movements that he just made up. He knew that real spying isn't like the movies. It's mostly just boring stuff, counting trucks, checking factory hours, that kind of thing. So he made his reports really boring. He'd write about the price of eggs or how tired the dock workers looked. The Germans loved it. They thought, this guy is the real deal. Nobody would make up stuff this boring. To make it even more believable, he started inventing other spies. He told the Germans he had recruited a Portuguese sailor named Jose. Jose didn't exist, but Juan gave him a whole life. He said his brother had been killed by communists, so he hated the British. Then he recruited a Venezuelan student in Glasgow. Why a student? Because students are usually broke and need money. Why Venezuelan? Because Juan could easily fake a South American accent if he ever had to. Pretty soon, Juan had a whole network of 27 imaginary spies. There was a guy in Wales with a gambling problem, a businessman who traveled a lot, even a widow who needed help with her bills. He wrote letters for all of them. He even filed expense reports for them. He'd ask the Germans for money to pay for the Venezuelan students' bar tabs or the widow's doctor visits, and the Germans sent the money, every single penny. One time he almost got caught. He reported seeing a big group of ships leaving a port in Liverpool. He got the names of the ships from an old newspaper, but he didn't realize the newspaper was a few days old. By the time his report got to the Germans, the ships were already gone. The Germans sent their submarines to find them and found nothing. Juan thought he was finished, but then he did something genius. He blamed the mail. He told the Germans, "I sent that message days ago. The postal service is just terrible." The Germans actually believed him. They didn't think he was lying. They just thought the mail was slow. They even gave him more money so he could hire more people to get the news out faster. Eventually, the Americans heard about this amazing German spy in England named Arabelle. They told the British, "You guys have a major leak. There's a spy named Arabelle sending incredible info to the Nazis." The British looked everywhere, but they couldn't find him. They finally realized it was the same Spanish guy they had rejected 4 times. This time, when he offered to help, they flew him to London immediately. Once he was in London, the British paired him with an officer named Thomas Harris. Harris was an art dealer who spoke perfect Spanish, and together they turned Juan's imaginary spy ring into a massive weapon. They called him Agent Garbo because he was the best actor in the world. For the next 2 years, they played a very dangerous game. They sent the Germans a mix of 98% truth and 2% poison. They would give the Germans real information, like where a certain army unit was moving, but they would always send it just a little bit too late. For example, if a group of tanks was leaving on a Tuesday, Juan would send the message on Wednesday. The Germans would see the tanks had moved, check Juan's report, and say, "Wow, he was right again. Too bad the message took so long." This built up a massive amount of trust. The Nazis thought Juan was their most valuable asset on the planet. This leads us to the most important part of the story, D-Day. The Allies were planning to invade France to finally stop the Nazis. It was a huge risk. If the Germans knew where they were landing, they could wait there with all their tanks and push the Allies back into the sea. The Allies were landing at Normandy, but they wanted the Germans to think they were landing at a place called Pas de Calais, which was about 150 miles away. This was Juan's moment. He had to convince Hitler himself that the Normandy landings were just a trick and that the real invasion was coming later at Calais. He spent weeks sending messages from his 27 fake spies, all saying the same thing. There are huge armies gathering near Calais. Normandy is just a distraction. On the night before D-Day, June 5, 1944, Juan sat at his radio. He had a message that was supposedly from his most trusted agent, saying the invasion was starting in Normandy, but that it wasn't the main one.